All right, we're off to the races here. I'm Dylan Giambatista. I'm a state rep running for state senate, and I'm very pleased today because we're going to have a conversation with a colleague of mine, Mike Yantachka. Mike is a representative out in Charlotte, and he's been serving in the legislature for the last 10 years and has a lot of experience, and he's been a leader on issues of renewable energy generation and trying to figure out how Vermont takes a leadership role in combating climate change. So Mike, I just want to thank you for being here today and for the opportunity to chat with you. Welcome.
Thanks, Dylan. It's good to join you today. And I think we do need to have a good discussion about the issues of climate change and energy, renewable energy, and what we're doing in our society today to really make the world a better place environmentally.
Absolutely. Well, this is one where Vermont, of course, has a very strong environmental tradition. And I know when we've gone down to the State House, we've done our part to try to support policies that move us forward. But I am curious, can you tell us a little bit, how do environmental issues impact the state of Vermont?
Well, they impact the state of Vermont really quite a bit. As you know, we rely on our environment, the quality of our environment, not only for our own lifestyle, but also for tourism and marketing. And, Vermont has a wonderful vibe when it comes to other people's view of us. And we can turn that into value add for any of the products we produce here in Vermont. You know, the Vermont name has quite a bit of cash to it.
Sure. Well, and I think that's really important. I think people lose sight of how interwoven our environment is to our economic well-being, both through tourism, but also through these artisanal quality products that Vermont is so associated with.
Right, and the fact that we rely so much on outdoor activities to generate revenues in terms of skiing, hiking, boating, fishing, hunting, all of these things contribute to the Vermont economy, and it would be a shame to lose these qualities that we have as a result of climate change, global warming, because that is what's happening. We are being impacted right now by the climate, by global warming, the climate, and it's impacted Vermont with more severe storms.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up because the ecological condition of our state is so important to people's well-being and their ability to enjoy a high standard of living. And of course, that is part of the Vermont brand. So when you see these negative impacts of climate change and some of the practical day-to-day ways that it's impacting Vermonters, it does connect to things like our healthcare system in some of the disease that we see coming forward and so forth. It connects to things like a impact on our bottom line and that we might not have as many tourism revenues if our waterways aren't clean. So certainly the ecology of the state and preserving it is important. And I actually want to get into this a little bit because you're on the Energy and Technology Committee, which is one of the 14 standing committees of the House. And of course, that's the committee that has jurisdiction over bills about things like renewable energy generation, meeting the goals of our comprehensive energy plan, which is our blueprint for trying to get to a reduction in emissions so that we have a healthy environment. Can you tell us about some of the bills you've been working on in the Energy and Technology Committee over the last 2 years and how they tie into really addressing the climate change crisis that the next generation is going to be inheriting?
Okay, so as you know, last year we had an awful lot of demonstrations and marches to the State House, and contact from people, from our constituents all over the state, with respect to having us do something to address the climate change problem, climate change crisis. It really is a crisis. And I think that's important because right now we're dealing with a pandemic, which is an existential crisis. And we have, in the climate crisis is also an existential crisis that we can't lose sight of. While we're focused on the pandemic, we can't just forget about doing anything about climate change. So early in the year, either early February or late January, we passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, and that bill has gone over to the Senate and is waiting for Senate action, which I hope that at some point this year, because it's the second year of the biennium, anything that doesn't get through this year has to be start fresh next year. So the Global Warming Solutions Act makes a fundamental change to what our expectations are in terms of what we can do about the climate. And like you said, we have the Comprehensive Energy Plan, which the goal is to get to 90% renewable energy by 2050. Well, Global Warming Solutions Act takes a little bit of a different turn on that, because now instead of talking about 90% renewable energy, which is important, we have to keep that in mind. That's one of the ways we can achieve this other objective, which is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions are 13% higher than they were in 1990. And until this pandemic hit, those emissions were continuing to increase. So the Global Warming Solutions Act has the objective of setting not just goals, but make requirements to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont to levels below that 1990 emissions level that we had back then.
Well, and so, Mike, this is really important because we have passed in the House the Global Warming Solutions Act. So that's moved over to the Senate, and it's going to take some additional leadership to ensure that moves forward. And if I picked up all the details there to explain it for folks back home, this would be taking our goals as a state. And goals are a great thing to have about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it would actually be creating a structure where we needed to meet those targets. So instead of having goals, you have enforceable targets, and it holds us accountable as policymakers to ensure that the money we're investing, money for the state, that it's going into goals and outcomes that actually will improve our trajectory in that. So that sounds like that's something that might have a shot still in moving forward if we're able to. And I think you would agree that it's very urgent that we do so to keep on track with our climate goals.
One of the key parts of that bill is to create a climate change commission, that a climate council that would be would consist of the Agency of Natural Resources and other agencies and departments of government, and they would be tasked with coming up with strategies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, so this is really important. So what you're describing is this bill would actually create a process where instead of sitting on our hands, which can happen sometimes in government, you're dealing with so many competing needs, you got a lot of busy stuff you're dealing with. It's hard to prioritize those long-term objectives. And certainly our climate goals, while we need immediate action, some people would argue that it's a longer-term vision that we need to be focused on. So by convening these conversations and putting some of our good state workers in the position to come up with the ideas and work collaboratively with communities, we might be able to come up with some of those long-term steps and actually bring to the legislature proposals then where we could move this conversation forward. And instead of having maybe an adversarial relationship between lawmakers, environmentalists, and this administration that's trying to do its work, we could all get on the same page and move together toward our climate goals. Is that right?
Yep. And I'll also point out that 10 years ago, Massachusetts implemented the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Yep.
And in that 10 years, they've been able to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 25%, and at the same time grow the economy by 25%.
Well, I'm glad you put it in those terms because seeing what Massachusetts has done and the economic opportunity it's generated is really important. And one of the things I like about the renewable energy revolution, that's what I call it. It's almost like a redesign of how we do business. It actually is creating jobs at every level in an economy. And many of those jobs are actually in the trades where we need electricians and others to actually do the installation work. So throughout sectors, it has a ripple effect, which is good for the economy. And when I hear you say that they've achieved in Massachusetts a decline in emissions of that proportion versus us since 1990, seeing, I think you said it was a 13% increase. I mean, those are two dramatically different trends. And I think that this is one where, while I love my Vermont pride and everything, I might want to be a little more like Massachusetts if we're going to actually walk the walk that we talk, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Well, Mike, let me ask you, I don't want to take too much of your time. This is a really excellent snapshot of what you're working on in committee. And I really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues are doing to try to move this renewable energy future ahead and combat climate change. But what would you say are the immediate steps Vermont can take now? Because again, we hear so much about, well, it's a long-term goal, we can put it off to another year. But I think you probably have some ideas about what we should be doing now to get these emissions under control and do our part to hand a better climate to future generations. What would you recommend?
Well, we want to see the Global Warming Solutions Act get passed by the Senate, and send it on to the governor. And he said that he wants to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So let's give him the opportunity to do that. One of the things that really helps, and ironically, the pandemic has let us see this, is that we have the ability to work remotely. And one of the other things that my committee has been working on is increasing broadband in Vermont. Our cities, our large communities, Chittenden County, for instance, has pretty good access to broadband. But there are rural areas in Vermont who do not have that. And when we think about places like the Northeast Kingdom, they're economically depressed compared to Chittenden County and Rutland and places like that. Broadband can actually help out. It can help them grow economically. It can create jobs.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because what I'm hearing you say is if we want to get serious about greenhouse gas reductions, it means that we're going to have to change how we do business. And that may mean less rides in the car to go to work. And if you can do it remotely in your home, there is an actual environmental benefit associated with that. If you're able to cut a couple trips a week, over time, that's going to add up. And if you look, I know that the largest contributor, I believe, to our fossil fuel emissions is the transportation sector. It's quite large, somewhere between 45, 50%. So certainly getting cars off the road would be good. And then I would think the other thing would be robust investment in public transportation options, so that to the extent we have vehicles or other forms of transportation shuttling people, if we can do it in large groups, such as an electrified bus or some sort of a rail option, we're actually going to be having that corresponding reduction. And all those cars that drive down 89 every day, we'll be taking them off the road, and we'll have more of that mass. So I know that's another strategy. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat a little bit today. And, it's really great to have you in my corner here. As I set off on a candidacy for state senate, hearing from folks from every corner of the county is really important. But having someone like you who has all this experience in renewable energy is really important. And I would hope that as we move forward, I know you're going to be at the table, but others who have questions should be reaching out. It sounds like you and your colleagues value getting that public input. Yeah. Well, Mike, we'll wrap up here. I would love to give you a sticker, but it's hard to do that through the computer monitor. So I'll send you one in the mail or something. But Mike Yantachka,
right up there on the camera.
That's right. Mike Yantachka from Charlotte, state representative, member of our House Energy and Technology Committee, and an all-around great guy. Thank you for joining today, and appreciate you lending some ideas here. I look forward to working with you, my friend.
Okay.